Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our first of 3 virtual community meetings to discuss the proposed Bond 2020 and next year's proposed budget for Dallas ISD. I am Dallas ISD's Chief of Staff, Pam Lear, and I'll be your moderator tonight. We value your input, and we look forward to your questions this evening. Tonight, we'll hear from the co-chairs of the Citizens Bond Steering Committee, Architect Craig Reynolds, and Drex Owusu, Senior Vice President for Education Workforce for the Dallas Regional Chamber. They'll be followed by Dallas ISD's Superintendent, Michael Hinojosa, who will share highlights from the Bond 2020 proposal. If you want to make or ask a question or make a comment, please click on the question and answer icon on the bottom of the screen and type in your question one at a time. You can type in a question at any time during the presentation. We may not be able to get to all the questions tonight, but we will provide an FAQ section in the community meeting section of our website. Please welcome Craig Reynolds and Drex Owusu.
Thank you, Dr. Lear. Good evening. Delighted to have you here joining us. Excuse the feedback. I'm pleased to all of you here with the work Bond Steering Committee. For several months, individuals from a variety of organizations and areas of the city attended meetings all through this past fall, as you see on the screen, where we received information about the district needs in the areas of safety, academic instruction, fine arts, choice, athletics, and more. Based on these discussions, I and co-chair Drex Owusu and chairs of the various committees worked with Dr. Hinojosa and his staff to help develop the proposals you'll hear about tonight. My co-chair is Drex Owusu. Drex?
Thanks, Craig. I'm also thrilled to be on with you guys tonight. Craig and I represent more than 100 volunteers who conducted research, asked questions, and developed recommendations in their assigned areas. The volunteers served on multiple committees, as you saw in the prior slide, and studied data and worked with district leaders to build recommendations for district facility needs. Our goal is to contribute to a blueprint for education of all our children who represent our city's future. Importantly, I want to speak to some of these foundational elements and point out that all of this work was underpinned with a lens around racial equity, as well as maintaining quality financial parameters, maintaining safety, security, and compliance at the top of our list and priorities, focus on technology as well as facility infrastructure, choosing or providing, continuing to provide choice and best fit schools for all our families, ensuring our physical structure meets all of the needs for our academic programs, and continuing to maintain equitable and competitive athletic facilities and fine arts programs for all of our students. And now I get to turn it over to our esteemed leader, Dr. Hinojosa, to present the proposed plan.
Thank you. And I really want to thank Craig and Drex. They've been spent a lot of time, a lot of hours in helping us come up with this proposal. And obviously, like Dr. Lear explained, what we're going to do tonight is going to go a little bit deeper in each one of these items that Drex covered just previously. But I also want to let you know that the next town hall, the next 2 town hall meetings will have a little different structure. You will actually be able to participate and ask questions in a more of a town hall manner. And so you'll have that opportunity in the future. So this won't be your only bite at the apple. And so I also want to remind people, as Craig said, we've been working on this in September, and we're not in a hurry because we're going to bring this information to you. Then we're going to go to the board twice in the month of June. And then we'll have a final draft that goes back out to the community. And in addition, I think there are a significant number of participants tonight, and there's going to be a room for as many as several 1,000 people participating in the two virtual town halls that are coming up. So let's first of all start with where we have been this past year. The district has had a pretty good year. We're having a great year until we ran into this virus. The tornado didn't stop us, and our staff and students really stepped up big. But during the year, this past year, we went up 5 points in our accountability ratings. As you can see the screen there, we launched several new innovation schools in local neighborhoods. We also, including dual language schools, and then we had some teachers and schools that were recognized on the national level. And we've also expanded technology. We were very fortunate that we had a long-range technology master plan that we were already deploying when the virus hit. 2 days before spring break, we had to remove those devices into the hands of students. And now we've accelerated purchasing devices that were already in our last bond for our elementary students so that they could have access. And also we've gotten some awards for our construction design. And what's not on the screen, a very recent announcement, HEB has honored the Dallas ISD's Excellence in Education Award as the best large district in Texas for 2020. So we've had some positive momentum, and that has helped us get ready for today. In the last bond program, we also had several examples that you're going to see of what is the art of the possible. Now we have to manage expectations because this project at Edna Road cost $15 million. In a moment, you're also going to see a project at Solar Prep that costs significant dollars. And of course, most people are familiar with South Oak Cliff. And so those are renovations that we can show you can have a big impact on the learning environment. So we're going to show you 3 videos. So please indulge us for a moment.
2, 1.
Enrollment now has a great new look and feel. When our staff, families, and neighbors pass the school and see what community support can do, I think everyone will feel a sense of pride of what they see here at Edna Road.
Now let's take a look at Girls Solar Prep. And then, of course, we had a major project at South Oak Cliff.
2, 1.
We wanted to give you a review of some of the projects that have been completed recently so you'd have an idea of what is possible with the work. So as the committee went and started putting this plan together, safety and security, for many obvious reasons, rose to the top. And as you can tell, the items that are on this page will have a significant impact on just about every campus. I'm not going to read the slide deck to you. You can read that. You can see what's on this page. But I do want to point out a few items. The security cameras will be upgraded and they'll be at every campus. Keyless card entry, and that will also be able to help us record everybody in and out. It documents a lot of things, and that'll certainly help with safety and security in our school buildings. And so this is close to $100 million that is being proposed. Now, part of the job is that the committee makes recommendations to me, and then I make recommendations to the board. And my recommendations, then the board considers and can at any time modify. But this is our best recommendation, and we have taken it to the board at one time. And so we can't ask you, tell you to vote for this. I cannot ask you to tell you to vote for this, but I do have to tell the board why I'm recommending what's in this plan. Another big important part of this are all the facilities. And so there are some things that you're not going to see that are going to be behind the walls. And that's the infrastructure and systems that are identified in the first section. But that's going to happen throughout the district. And especially the items that are in most need will be at the front end. We also have some life and safety enhancements that have to happen. And then obviously the safety and security. Every school that we touch, we're going to try to have the keyless entries that I just described, but also we're going to have a secure vestibule. When these schools were built, they had multiple entrances. So what we're going to, so that we can control access, is a vestibule at the front of the building where everyone has to check in as you go in. This is going to improve the security of our buildings significantly. Now look at the dollar. The major portion of this bond program is almost $2 billion in facilities. And as you can tell, there's going to be significant retrofit and modernization of the classrooms. You can see the pictures of what is the current and what is proposed. So you'll see finishes, you'll see new ceilings and lighting. You'll see all the items that are in all of these sections. In the hallways, you'll see floorings, and then you'll see the exterior of the building where we have things such as irrigation and marquees and making sure that we have new doors where appropriate. One of the things that is important is that every suburban, I've been a superintendent in 3 suburban communities, and they had all of these things. And we don't have all of these things in Dallas. The lift has been huge, but this was a major initiative that our team put together to make sure that we would modernize all of our campuses district-wide. This is not just happening in a few schools, this is happening district-wide. Now, it may take us a while because this is a huge program, so it may take a while, and we will use a phasing process to identify which campuses get dealt with first, and we're going to use the data that has been put together in the master plan to identify which ones we recommend to the board will be in the initial phases. But there's also a lot of new schools. And you'll see that there was a decision point that our teams had to make, the engineers and the architects and the staff members. At some point, it was too costly to just renovate a school. So the schools at the top of the page are the schools that will get new facilities. These will be replaced. And then the ones at the bottom of the page, as you see there, were schools that will get significant additions because of space constraints or items that are necessary to be built upon. And so this was an item that we took to the board, and they asked us to put back in that was in our original master plan, and we certainly accommodated the request of the board. Also, we have a lot of items that have already been approved that are items that are in the pipeline, as so to speak. And there's $272 million of this approximately, and these are projects that we're going to open these schools. Right now, we have City Lab and Early College High School that are downtown in buildings that are not adequate, but we're also approved the downtown Dallas Inc. Montessori School in New Park. All of those will be in one building together should this bond pass. We also have a Midtown project at the old Valley View Mall that has been approved, and now we need the funding for the building. We also are looking at a K-8 STEM school in the medical district. We're close to, in partnership with UT Southwestern. Affectionately, we're talking about Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Arts Academy, as we affectionately call it, the Baby Booker T School, to get our students prepared to enter Booker T. Washington. We also have a Visual and Digital Arts High School that we have approved, and we need to retrofit and rebuild the old Adamson High School, which has a historical designation, and we cannot touch the outside of the building, but we can make it compatible for a school that's been approved, that's in the pipeline, and we need a facility for it to accommodate it. Now, there are also other schools in transformation and innovation that are not in the pipeline that are under consideration at this time. We're looking at potentially having a K-8 Montessori school in Pleasant Grove. There's a North Oak Cliff International Baccalaureate Academy that is being considered. We have a Southwest Dallas Leadership School that we're considering. And then we also don't know what's going to be in public school choice 8.0 and 9.0. There may be some other opportunities to open new campuses or renovate existing campuses to meet the needs of the proposals that we get from our staff and communities about new schools. So that's another piece of it. Another item that we're very excited about that's moving forward and we need solutions for facilities are our 4 career institutes. These are the pathways that we have already underway in our school district, such as construction and carpentry. You see them on the electrical and solar technology, heat, ventilation, and air conditioning. And so we have aviation opportunities for our students to be involved and get training. And this will impact every high school in Dallas, but there'll be 4 regional hubs that we will be using to make sure that our students go there and get training. These are the 4 current pathways that we have, but we're also excited about 4 new pathways that help our students get appropriate wage jobs in the industry. And those include logistics, cybersecurity, mechatronics, air traffic control. And so we're very excited and get a lot of support about the future of these schools. The price tag for these 4 is about $250 million, and one will be in each quadrant of the city. We're going to have those in the quadrants of the city, and we're looking, if the bond is successful, to make sure that we build facilities. 2 of the proposed will be new buildings, and 2 will be retrofitted, renovated schools that we currently have. Also, there's other things in career and tech that are important. One for our special needs students at the Multiple Careers Magnet that needs to be upgraded. And we also have some current labs that have become obsolete that don't have the new technology. That you see the ones on the page there that are included in part of this package. And also our environmental center needs to be upgraded and modernized. We also are looking, there was a tremendous amount of energy and support for a district-wide performing arts center. And so we've seen this in multiple communities, both urban and suburban in the state of Texas. And our music programs have improved significantly in the district over the last 10 years. And now there is a significant pipeline in the fine arts. But not only do we need a performing arts center at the district level, but we also need to look at what do we do at the local campuses to improve things at the local campuses to make all of this work. Technology, we've made a lot of progress in technology. We're very proud of that. But as you know, there's currently some issues about connectivity. And so we need some dollars to make sure that we can execute Operation Connectivity in this crisis situation that we're in. These are items that are necessary. There also need to refresh classroom technology and communication systems and district legacy systems over time. And so those are also being considered in the $250 million portion of the technology. Athletics will also get a significant increase. It is much more efficient long-term to have field turf. Field turf is a situation now that requires less maintenance, and the committee decided to take to the board that every high school would have at least 1 practice field that will be turf. This is multi-purpose. It can be used by the football team, the band, the baseball team when it rains, the softball team when the weather is unacceptable, and so that will be part of the proposal. There's going to be improvements to the central athletic facilities. We have several regional facilities that need some modernization, and we need practice tracks at our high schools. We're falling behind on that, and there's also an amount of money set aside for individual baseball and softball fields that need to be upgraded that are not up to par at this time. Now, there is also an additional investment that are important to consider as well. There's been a lot of conversation about the Racial Equity School Community Hub. These are campuses where we're looking to expand to make sure that our families have services readily available on our campuses to make sure that our students can have an equal life's chance. And these are in 4 underserved communities that need to be upgraded and brought up to speed. We also have, it's one thing to modernize the entire building, and then we have antiquated furniture. The furniture has changed a lot in our industry, as is evident as our personalized learning schools, and also in our P-TECH program, the furniture makes a difference. And so to complete, there's an $80 million price tag to make sure that we modernize the furniture in the entire system. There will be a need for property acquisition on a couple of projects that we've mentioned here. And so there needs to be a fund set aside for that. And our board is also very excited about a joint participation project with either the city or the county or some other entity that we could solve problems together. And so there's a fund set aside for that. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're sensitive to the environment and have a green building fund. So here is the overview on a page. Here are the major items. As you can see, there is $3 billion of these dollars are being proposed for facilities, either new and replacement schools or major and significant renovations and modernization. And then you see safety, technology, and then the other programs that need to augment our support. I also want to make a point that when Drex covered his slide, on the side of that slide was a whole thing about racial equity. Because our board adopted a resolution about racial equity, and this is new to this bond, the entire lens of everything that we've looked at in this proposal has had a racial equity lens, but also the $41 million that has been set aside for the school community hubs is a specific initiative that is being considered at this time. And you see the balance of this. So that's an overview of where we are with the bond program. Now let's talk about the financing, a few other details before we get to the questions. Number one, we typically amortize over 20 to 22 to 25 years. This one, we've extended the amortization to 30 years, and that's when the bonds will be paid back. You see what our total projected debt service would become, and then you see the maximum tax rate, and you see the maximum tax rate increase. This bond program has been put together without a tax rate increase. However, there are a few complications because of new legislation that we need to talk about. And also because of legislation through Senate Bill 30 and House Bill 3, we have some new requirements. And so there will have to be at least 4 propositions, could vary depending on what the board gives us approval to move forward on because of new legislation. In the past, in Dallas bond elections, we've had 1 proposition, yes or no, up or down, but now they have different requirements about things that are not necessarily campus-based. And so you'll see the requirements on this page, and there'll be a lot more information to come about this. So at this point, now I'm going to turn it over. We received several questions ahead of time, and so I'm going to ask Dr. Lear to kind of guide us through the question.
Absolutely. And I just want to remind the audience, if you have questions, there's an icon, a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to input those and send. And again, if we don't get to all of the questions, we will certainly pull all of those and put an FAQ out. So Dr. Hinojosa, the first question I have is, with the superintendent declaring that we are reimagining schools and students would be home more, why do we need bricks and mortar? Has the assumption changed since COVID-19? If so, what and how was it vetted?
Well, one of the things that we've discovered is that things will change. How they will change is really up in the air. But regardless of whether they change or not, we're going to need gathering spaces for our students. Now, the answer to this question is how flexible are those spaces going to be in the future? We do know, though, that here's an opportunity to make some changes, but there's also state laws. The state requires seat time, and you have to be actually physically in a school building to get credit and get funding under certain conditions. Now, the state commissioner has authority to waive certain portions of that, but those have to be approved by the commissioner and the school board if you're going to request that. So while we are changing, we don't know the scope of all those changes at this time, and we do know that we'll need gathering spaces for our students.
Great. The next question is, now that technology is a critical piece to next year's learning, in particular access to Wi-Fi and devices for at-home instruction and learning, how much of the proposed bond and operations budget for next year has been allocated to provide the tools and resources for all DISD students and families?
Well, that's a great question. We have a couple of answers for that. We have a total of $250 million proposed for technology. Part of that is to make sure we have refreshed devices and devices that are up to speed. But part of that is for infrastructure, specifically $25 million. And we could also use the joint projects for that. Now, one thing that I'm going to be working with the state and the federal government about, do they pick up the tab for that? But not knowing whether they will or not, Dallas has to have our own solution, and our solution is embedded in this bond program. So the short answer to what you asked, Dr. Lear, is yes, we have enough money to make Operation Connectivity a reality should this bond proposal be approved. If not, then we would have to find a different way to solve that problem.
Great, thank you. And this may be for you or maybe our CFO. Dallas ISD's credit rating is based on the rating of the Texas Permanent School Fund. Given that the TPSF is likely to underperform in the current economic environment, how far does DISD expect its credit rating will be lowered?
Yeah, we don't, I'll have Dwayne Thompson be prepared to answer this in just a moment. We don't expect our credit rating to be lowered. We have the best financial standing that we've had in the history, and that's why our underlying rating is very important. We don't know what's going to happen with the permanent school fund. So Dwayne, you want to add any to that response?
Yes, the PSF has a AAA rating and our individual as a district rate is just below that. So even if there hasn't been any movement on the PSF rating yet, but even if there is, our rating is right below that. So we don't anticipate any impact.
I would also like to add that our finance team and their consultants have added a lot of conservative elements to make sure that we don't, that we underpromise and overdeliver on what the potential impact on the tax rate would be in future years.
Okay. The next question is, would you please explain why we are proposing to build a $100 million theater when there are plenty of venues here in the city that are not being used?
Yeah, though we have no control over the other buildings that are used, whether we use them or not. I know that it's seasonal, but many times they are booked. And this would be an opportunity for our students to be able to showcase their talents. As I've said in the past and recently, not only do we have outstanding programs like at Booker T and other schools, but now, as I've noticed, our programs throughout the district have improved. And this would be an opportunity for us to showcase and have control of the facilities for our students to be able to display their talents. This was something that came from the committee, the community committee, that was probably not on our radar until it was requested by the committee about the need for such a venue. And it will be on a separate ballot, so that people will have an individual opportunity to vote yes or no on a separate ballot on that part of it. On a separate proposition, I should say.
Dr. Nohosa, this might be for you or Chief Lane. How did you select the communities that will receive new schools under this bond?
I'll start, but Scott Lane needs to add. We did look at the facility condition index, and there is a formula that our team and our consultants looked at. At some point, it becomes more efficient to build new than to continue to try to retrofit a building that may have some inefficient systems such as air conditioning, windows, etc. So Chief Lane, will you pick up from there and answer the balance of that question?
Yes, sir. The long-range master plan that we started in 2018 identified all of our facilities in terms of utilization in terms of facility condition index. And the schools were selected based on a high FCI, meaning it wasn't worth putting the money into those schools. It was more economical to rebuild those schools. And then we also took into consideration the student enrollment at those schools. So they are, there's 14 replacement schools in this program, and they're scattered throughout the city.
Thank you, Scott.
Will all 9 trustee districts receive an equal share of the proceeds of this bond?
The short answer is no. This bond is being driven based upon need, based upon inventory, and so it was going to be virtually impossible to engineer it where every school board district would get the same amount. And so what drove the plan was the long-range facilities master and technology plan, and then feedback about the needs. And so that's what was the basis for how we came up with the projects.
Is the district enrolling enough students to justify a bond package?
Well, this bond package, as you can tell, is replacement. Our enrollment has leveled out, in fact, slightly declining over the last several years. We do have an initiative to increase market share, but as you can tell, there's a lot of innovation in the district and there's a lot of modernization in the district. And so enrollment shifts have occurred in certain parts of the community, because our families can no longer afford some of the apartments that are going up. So there are significant enrollment shifts that are occurring, and there's a lot of new exciting projects. So the short answer is no, the enrollment's not growing, but yes, there's been a lot of need in the district, and so this will help modernize the campuses throughout the system.
How much will my taxes increase if the bond is approved?
Well, if the bond is approved, your taxes won't increase at all. Now, that is a truthful answer. However, there are nuances. If the property value that you own increases, then of course you would pay that same rate, but it'll be more because now the value of your home is worth more. But the question was about what will this bond cause the tax rate to increase. And let me also be clear here. While we get no benefit if property values grow, or very little benefit if property values grow on the operating side, we do get benefit for property values to grow overall in the amount of funds that we have available for our capital needs. And so that's why it works out that way.
What is the time frame for the projects in the pipeline? For example, the STEM school and the medical district.
Well, we do have a projected timeline those schools will be opening in the next 3 to 4 years. Some of them have a different level of approval, and some of them are dependent on the facility. So we will try to ramp up, just like we had to delay the Toyota SMU school in K-8 in the last bond program in West Dallas for a year because it was contingent on the building becoming available. We do have a little bit of flexibility, but those projects have been approved, and the expectation is that those projects will be implemented in the next 3 years, 3 to 4 years. All of them have a different timeline, and so please stay tuned. We have a website that gives us that information as those projects move forward and as we acquire the land and build the buildings.
Do you have the ability to divert planned funds, perhaps sport funding, towards the needs for the pandemic? For example, improve technology for at-home use and increase broadband access? Or are you looking for funds elsewhere for the urgent needs?
Well, that's a great question. We actually have some funds, we already had some funds set aside for our technology plan, which is helping us significantly during the pandemic. So the short answer is we don't have to divert funds. We already have funds available to do that. Our bigger ask is for the federal government to do some infrastructure funding in this next stimulus that will also augment that. So the bottom line is we don't have to divert funds from athletics buildings to do this. But also, let me be very clear. There's a difference between operating funds and capital funds. And what we're talking about this evening are just capital construction funds and technology and infrastructure funds.
Okay. How will the diminished tax income resulting from the coronavirus affect these plans?
That is a fantastic question. The short answer is we don't know yet. However, we know that for next year, our property values still grew significantly, so there will be no impact in the short term. We also, as the models were put together, and I'm going to ask Dwayne Thompson to elaborate on this, and our teams with our consultants and our staff were very conservative about property value growth in the future years. And so we're confident that we can maintain our promise of not having a tax rate increase, or we can slow down the projects if necessary. Dwayne, do you want to add to the response to that question?
Yes, sir. So we did, in fact, estimate very conservatively the value increase, but we also estimated high on the interest rate that we would pay. So with both of those coupled together, those are what impacts our overall repayment plan. And so as Dr. Hinojosa mentioned, is we can slow down if we need to, and we can adjust, and we have flexibility within that to meet the expectations of what we're presenting to the board and the community.
And Dwayne, you have a great way of explaining about what, if the voters voted yes, what it actually does about when you actually go into debt. And I think a lot of people need to understand that concept. Will you explain how that works?
Yes, sir. So many times when you have a bond issue, in particular when this size, they're like, how can that not change my taxes? So the way I equate that is if you go out to get pre-approved for a car or a home, you have that authorization, but you haven't gone into debt yet. So that's the same way with a bond issue. If the voters approve a bond issue, we are authorized to go into debt, but we are no more in debt that day than we were the day before. It takes action by the board to approve the sale of the bonds, then that becomes an obligation of the district. So through our planning, we have a series of sales in various amounts that would keep the project rolling, but would replace existing debt with new debt to keep the tax rate constant.
Thank you, Dwayne.
How does the recent 2015 $1.6 billion bond election, considering part of this debt is not sold, factor into the tax rate and bond debt capacity assumptions?
Dwayne, that one's above my pay grade, so you're going to have to answer that question.
So we have an existing repayment schedule which incorporates past bond issues, including the 2015. And just last month, the board did authorize us to sell another portion of the 2015 debt. And we have that, and the next sale as well will be coming up to conclude the 2015. All of those are calculated into our projections to anticipate those repayment schedules, and they're all already factored in. As I mentioned in the last question, even though the bond issue, if it's successful in 2020, there'll be a period after that that we're selling bonds, so it doesn't hit the tax rate immediately. So we have all that structured to be able to, as we're paying off debt each and every year, we'd be replacing debt with the new sales.
Dwayne, while we're on this topic, why don't you talk about whether there are penalties or not for paying off early? Should you have additional revenue to pay down future debt early? Will you describe how that works?
Yes, sir. So currently in almost every sale that we have what are called call dates. And basically that would be in the future, you would have a time where if you chose to call those bonds, you could pay them off early if you had funds available. And so the district has been doing that as we progress. For instance, this year, in the budget for next year, I think the estimated early payments are right around $50 million. And so as we have funds available in the debt repayment schedule, we will pay off debt early, which saves the taxpayer interest and makes room for future debt sales to keep the tax rate constant.
Thank you.
Is there a need to reassess the ability to repay the bond with the expected drop in property values after COVID-19?
We've covered part of that answer already, but we have contingencies to make that happen. And at any time, if the board says, look, we're not comfortable selling bonds right now, depending on how far this goes, then we will obviously be able to pivot. But we have authorization to do it. I don't know, Dwayne, if you need to add anything to that response.
Right. Now, we will continually monitor obviously we'll have the values that we'll utilize. We'll monitor the market and the interest rates, and we may have to revise our sales structure as far as the dollar amount, but we won't propose to the board selling anything that would take us over the proposed tax rate.
Is the plan for TJ and Walnut Hill campus reconstructions buried in these plans? Why not do a separate line item for this unique situation?
Dwayne, you want to talk about, Scott, either one of you want to talk about where it is for the Thomas Jefferson, and we are getting some insurance money. We're going to apply for some other funds, but will one of you talk about how Walnut Hill and Thomas Jefferson are included here?
Yes, sir. Prior to the tornado occurring, we had already started the planning process for this bond program. And there was money allocated within the 2020 bond for renovations at both TJ and Cary. So we have continued to carry that money as a part of this bond program, and those funds will go towards the replacement costs and the additional renovations for TJ.
Do you know what energy efficiency standard the new buildings plan are to be built? Are there any plans yet for any of the buildings to be net zero energy buildings?
That'd be your question, Scott.
Currently, we don't have any plans, but we do follow, of course, the energy code, and we also participate in the CHIPS program. We do have money identified in this program, $10 million for green building funds. So those could be put towards individual projects and consideration of net zero on future projects.
How will the community members be aware of the progress that this district is making for each bond project?
Let me start with that and then have Scott finish up on that. One of the things that this district has done very well, and I've been involved directly for 11 years and on the periphery for another 3 years, is that every board member appoints an individual to serve on the bond advisory committee. And this bond advisory committee meets on a very regular basis to look at the status of bond projects. As we get new information, that committee is apprised, and they then put that information together, and they also give us a report, and that information is very well documented and chronicled. And so there has been significant oversight in the 2002, 2005, 2008, 2015 bonds. So Scott, anything to add to that?
Just one thing, as the projects move forward in the design process, as with the 2015 bond, we will have community meetings for every project to ensure all of the communities have input into their projects.
Will you distinguish between capital funds and operating funds? Many community members I spoke with about the bond needed more information.
That's a great question, and we apologize because sometimes we start talking in our own jargon and acronyms. Operating funds, maintenance and operating funds, that's what you need to take care of business, to pay salaries, to pay bills, to pay for electricity, pay for things, consumables like travel and supplies and materials. That's one set of funds, and you can only use it for those purposes. For capital projects where you can go into debt for construction, some technology, and there are some other things like purchasing school buses that have a value, those can be amortized over a specific period of time to pay back the value of those. So Dwayne, you want to add anything to that response?
No, the only thing I would add to that is sometimes there's confusion of that we can pay for teacher salaries or something like that out of the bond fund, and that is not possible. That's why they're separate. And one's for, as we mentioned, capital improvements, and the other is for general operations, and that's where teacher salaries or other personnel salaries would come from.
Thank you.
Is there a budget set aside for training for virtual teaching and how to meet the needs of students' SEL needs?
That would be totally separate from the bond, so we're probably not going to cover too much of that tonight. We would encourage you, so the short answer is yes, and our professional development department has put together some significant webinars I know that we've had over 5,000 of our teachers participate recently in a couple of specific webinars on how to do this kind of instruction. But those funds are separate from what we're talking about today. That would be bond funds.
Are there funds earmarked for pool improvements or new pool facilities?
That's one I don't know much about. So Scott, where are we on that?
Yes, sir. There are funds marked for renovations to all of our pools. There are no funds marked for new pools.
Okay. How will citizens' input figure into the management of this bond plan?
Well, as on the management side, that's, we're responsible and we're held accountable and we have procedures and audits for the management of it. Now, there is significant input on the getting input on what the design's going to look like. What are the expectations and requirements on the building side of it. But specifically, we have to follow our audit requirements, and we do have external auditors that look at our programs and give us feedback on how they do that. Dwayne, you want to add to that?
So I think you covered it.
Let's see here.
We also need to do a brief budget presentation this evening, so we may be getting to the end of our time. We will try to respond to the balance of these questions, but let's see if we can take a couple more before we go to our budget presentation.
Sure. Did you consider the cost of making new buildings and renovations energy efficient compared to the cost of heating and cooling buildings that aren't energy efficient?
Yes, that is a great question. We try to allude to that a little bit earlier. And there is a point of demarcation when it's going to cost you so much more to keep trying to renovate an old building because the systems are so old. And that's why those 14 schools that are identified as new schools, that was the tipping point that pushed us towards a new build rather than a significant renovation. It was going to be much more efficient. Our air conditioning bills are going to be much lower over the long haul because of the very question that you asked at those particular buildings. Now, we're very proud when you look at Kennedy Curry, when you look at Wilmer Hudson's, when you look at South Oak Cliff, when you look at Edna Road, we can make these older buildings look very nice with significant support. However, then there are the systems that you also have to worry about.
If this bond passes, what is the estimated timeline for the school replacements and expansions?
That's a great question, and it'll be phased out. Realistically, if this bond passes, there's a lot of work in here because there's so much renovation and the new schools. So, and part of that is how much can you actually construct? We think the entire plan will last us 10 years, but certain items will have to be pushed to the front and will be done in the first couple of years. That comes into the phasing and planning going forward. Scott Lane or Dwayne, Scott, anything to add to that response?
Yeah, I mean, we would love to do every school in the first year, but economically, all of the new schools, we have a total of 21 new schools in this bond program. So obviously, due to the economy, the availability of labor, those schools are going to have to be sequenced out over a number of years.
So we have time for one more question, and I've heard that each major proposition in the bond will have to be voted on separately. Is that true, and why?
That is true, and the legislature passed a bill this past session that requires that anything that is not campus-based will have to have a separate proposition. That is new, is in my 25 years of doing school construction, that has never been a requirement to do. But that was a new law that was passed, and so we'll have to honor that. And that's why you cannot even put athletics together with fine arts. Those have to be separate propositions. And so that's why it's become a little bit more complicated this year. So it looks like we're wrapping up. That was our last question. We need to go to do our budget. I do want to thank all of you for participating. Please be reminded, we're not going to repeat the presentation in our next 2 town hall meetings. We're just going to give you an opportunity then to get specific into those questions, and there'll be a lot more opportunities for input. So at this time, I'm going to ask Dwayne Thompson to kind of give us an overview of our budget.
Good evening. I lost the screen there for a moment. Sorry. So good evening. Basically, as we're going through and preparing for the 2021 general fund budget, we're in the process of doing this. This presentation is the presentation that I gave to the board in April. We'll have another presentation to the board in May, and then finally the board will be requested to approve the operating budget in June. Our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th fiscal year. This slide here is we're looking at, as we're going through the budget, we look at where are we in the comparison for this year. So this is our report as of February, the end of February, and you can see the general fund revenue was $1.6 billion anticipated, and through February we had already collected 96% of that budget, or almost $1.4 billion. So we only had $243 million left to collect. So in comparison to previous years, we're right on track to collect our revenue estimates. So then we move on to our general fund expenditures, which is, as we mentioned earlier, that's where the payroll costs are and so forth. As to operating, it had 1.6 billion as well, and we were 54% through 902 million as it related to through February. So we're, in comparison to the previous years, we're tracking well. We should be under budget, and moving forward with an increase in our fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. So what are the budget assumptions? And the main two driving forces within the budget are two things: the property tax value and student enrollment. Property tax value is important because we are an equalized funding state, which means the more the local individuals pay, the less the state participates, and you'll see that in a slide in a moment. So our estimate for next year was a 5% increase. So in the total value of our property within the entire district. We've also anticipated the student enrollment was going to be at 152,272, which represents a decrease of right around 1,500 students. So we are taking into account the anticipation that we will continue to lose students. We're hoping to level that off with some of the initiatives we put in place, but we need to budget as if we're going to continue with the same trends that we had. Then from all those items, then we also put in what is our maintenance and operation tax rate. We talked earlier about the tax rate for debt, which is the 24.2 cents, but this is related to the operational side. In 1819, our tax rate was $1.17. Then the legislative session passed House Bill 3, and this year it's $1.685, so we had a reduction. Part of the legislation that passed was if your value in your district exceeds 2.5%, so the district gets to realize 2.5%. If it exceeds 2.5%, there has to, for anything over that percentage, there has to be a proportional reduction to the tax rate. So at this point, we're anticipating the tax rate to be $1.45. The interesting thing about that is that TEA will actually set the tax rate, and they're not anticipating to provide that tax rate to us till August 5th or later. So we will start the year with an estimate and then ask the board to revise the tax rate to whatever it is actually determined to be. Within the budget, the first thing we always look at are our strategic initiatives, and they're listed there for you. One of the things 2 years ago, we had a TRE that the community supported for us to be able to fund these. And so always first and foremost in our budget consideration are these 5 items. So as we're developing the budget, and this is for next year, is our local revenue. As you can see there, currently is almost 82% of our budget. We're anticipating next year with the 5% increase, it would be 85% of our budget. And you can see there, then the state portion would drop from 14% to 10.6. So in that scenario, we believe that we'll have anticipated about $7 million more available to the district for next year to utilize. Then when we're looking at expenditures, really what we've done to this point is maintain the flat on expenditures. We've had retreats to discuss the items that we're going to add in that will be presented to the board, as well as there's some additional funding that's coming from the state in the form of teacher incentive allotment, which would help us with our rewarding our teachers at the top level of their performance. So what you would anticipate as we move into June, into May, and then ultimately June, that the budget will get fine-tuned for the board to consider, and finally that we would anticipate that the budget would be what we would call basically flat, where the revenue, the expenditures pretty much match the revenue, so we would not be eating into our fund balance from the standpoint of our projected budget. So that concludes the quick analysis of our where we are in the budget. So I know there's been questions, so I will answer those.
Yes, we do have a few. On budget, given 152,272 population, how much is state recapture?
State recapture, and I'm glad we talked about that, because of House Bill 3, that gave us a great deal of relief on recapture. So we would, in the past, we were anticipating recapture would be probably be closer to 200 million. For this next year, we're looking at it being around 19 million. So that is a huge difference for us, but that based on that student count, that's where we'll be.
Okay. If shelter-in-place orders are still in effect in August, how will expenses related to at-home learning impact the budget?
Okay, so there's, when we're having at-home learning, there's two sides to that coin. The first is that obviously there's some additional expense to get information to the students, whether that be printed materials or other items, but by the same token, there's normal operating expenses that we're not incurring. For instance, busing, field trips, that sort of thing. And so we're having some savings on the non-utilized funds, and we're replacing it with expenses for the things that we're doing at home. So it's pretty much a wash on those items up to this date. And so we would anticipate that if that went into August.
When does the district plan to address positions cuts in past years, like media specialists for every school and teachers, to make class sizes smaller? So
we have every year we take what the demographer provides by campus and by grade, and we go through a calculation based on our formulas of class size. And so we go through that calculation to determine the campus, the number of certified staff as well as other staff at the campus level. And then once school starts, then I take a look at the, we have a process that we go through called leveling to be able to identify where there were growth or reductions in student counts from what was projected. So at leveling, then we can add additional teachers.
Okay, and I have one more question. What % of the staff headcount is projected to be teachers?
Just off the top of my head, I don't know the actual count of teachers. I think it's close to 10,000, but that may include all certified staff. When it may be like media specialists or counselors, I would have to get the exact number of how many certified staff we have.
Okay, and we can include that in the
Absolutely.
FAQs. So before we leave this evening, I would like to turn it back over to Craig Reynolds and Dreg Owusu for some closing statements.
Thank you, Dr. Lira. This has been a very insightful and informative discussion we've had this evening. Dr. Hinojosa, thank you for your time that you and your staff have assembled all of this data. And certainly, Drex and I want to thank all the community members of our Citizens Bond steering committees that have been participating with us since late last summer in assembling this data and assembling the needs for the school district. Drex?
No, I was just going to say on behalf of all of our executive committee members and almost 100 community members who participated in this process, we want to say thank you for your time and interest today. We will continue to provide information and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Visit our website, dallasisd.org/bond2020 and budget to register for the 2 remaining town halls. And we look forward to seeing you then.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for co-chairing. Thank you, Dr. Hinojosa. Thank you, Chief Thompson and Chief Lane. And we look forward to talking again next week, May 13th. Thank you.
Good, thank you.